They thought the bloodline was dead and buried. After Roman's medical imprisonment, Jimmy's devastating divorce from the corporate spy who destroyed their family trust, and months of systematic attacks from corporate-sponsored assassins, wrestling fans believed that the most dominant faction in WWE history had been permanently fractured beyond any hope of repair. But last night on Monday Night Raw, Jey Uso delivered the most shocking, most emotionally devastating, and most perfectly calculated promo in wrestling history, speaking to his twin brother Jimmy with words that sounded exactly like Roman Reigns at his most dominant and manipulative. What Jey revealed about his transformation from loyal soldier to calculating tribal chief will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty, power corruption, and the dark side of legacy that turns brothers into enemies. The moment that changed everything happened during what was supposed to be a routine interview segment with Jimmy Uso, who had been attempting to rebuild his career and reputation after the public destruction of his marriage to corporate spy Naomi. Jimmy was sitting in that interview chair looking broken, humiliated, and desperately trying to convince the wrestling world that he could be trusted despite being married to someone who had systematically betrayed the bloodline for 8 years. Jimmy looked pathetic, one backstage observer later recalled, with a mixture of pity and disgust, trying to explain how he couldn't have known about his wife's corporate espionage, making excuses for why he never suspected that the woman sharing his bed was documenting his family's vulnerabilities for WWE executives who wanted them eliminated. But Jimmy's attempt at damage control and reputation rehabilitation was interrupted by the entrance of his twin brother Jey, who walked onto that interview set with a presence and authority that immediately made everyone understand that something fundamental had changed in the USO family dynamic. Jey looked different, another witness observed with obvious awe and concern. Not just confident, but commanding. Not just focused, but calculating. He had the same energy that Roman used to carry when he was at his most dominant and ruthless. The transformation of Jey Uso from loyal soldier to potential tribal chief was immediately apparent in his body language, his facial expressions, and most importantly, the way he looked at his twin brother, not with the unconditional love that had defined their relationship for 30 years, but with the cold assessment of someone evaluating a potential threat. Jey's voice carried through the interview area with authority that made everyone stop what they were doing and pay attention. "We need to talk about your situation." The pause before the word situation was loaded with implications that made it clear Jey wasn't just referring to Jimmy's divorce, but to his entire reliability as a member of the bloodline family and his fitness to continue representing their legacy. "What situation?" Jimmy's response revealed someone who was either genuinely confused about his brother's concerns or desperately trying to avoid acknowledging the scope of his failures and betrayals. But Jey's response to his brother's question sent shockwaves through everyone present, because his words didn't just sound like something Roman Reigns would say, they were delivered with the exact same tone, cadence, and manipulative authority that had made the tribal chief so effective at controlling people. "Your situation," Jey repeated with emphasis that made everyone understand this was about more than just Jimmy's personal problems, "is that you were married to a corporate spy for 8 years and never suspected that your own wife was documenting our family's vulnerabilities for people who wanted us eliminated." The clinical coldness with which Jey delivered this assessment revealed someone who had moved beyond brotherly concern into the realm of strategic evaluation, treating Jimmy's marriage disaster as a liability that needed to be addressed rather than a personal tragedy that deserved sympathy. "I didn't know," Jimmy's voice cracked with obvious pain as he tried to defend himself against his brother's accusations. "Naomi fooled everyone, not just me. She was a professional spy who had been trained to manipulate people's emotions and extract information without being detected." But Jey's response to Jimmy's defense revealed the full extent of his transformation from supportive brother to calculating leader who prioritized family security over individual feelings. "You didn't know," Jey's voice dripped with the same disappointed authority that Roman had perfected during his most effective periods of psychological manipulation. "Or you didn't want to know because acknowledging the truth would have required you to choose between your wife and your family?" The question hung in the air like an accusation that challenged not just Jimmy's awareness, but his loyalty and priorities during the most critical period in bloodline history. "The signs were there, Jey continued with relentless logic that sounded exactly like Roman breaking down an opponent's psychological defenses. Her access to family information, her knowledge of Roman's schedule and vulnerabilities, her convenient absences during family meetings, her financial independence despite no obvious income sources. The systematic destruction of Jimmy's credibility through documented evidence revealed someone who had learned Roman's techniques of psychological warfare and was now applying them against his own twin brother. "But you chose to ignore the signs because acknowledging them would have meant accepting that your marriage was built on deception and your judgment was catastrophically flawed." Jey's words cut through Jimmy like surgical instruments designed to cause maximum psychological damage. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of Jey's verbal assault was his adoption of Roman's signature phrases and speech patterns, as if he was channeling the tribal chief's spirit to deliver judgment against his own brother. Jey's voice took on the commanding tone that Roman had used to control entire storylines and manipulate audience emotions. "You have disappointed this family in ways that go beyond simple mistakes or personal failings." The formal language and authoritative delivery revealed someone who had studied Roman's leadership style and was now implementing it to establish his own dominance within the fractured bloodline hierarchy. Your wife provided intelligence that was used to plan Roman's assassination, Jey continued with the same clinical detachment that Roman had shown when systematically destroying his enemies. Your marriage gave our enemies access to family secrets that they used to torture our tribal chief and nearly eliminate our entire legacy. But the most devastating moment came when Jey delivered what would become one of the most quoted lines in wrestling history, using words that could have come directly from Roman's mouth during his most ruthless period. You don't just represent yourself, Jimmy. Jey's voice carried the weight of generational authority as he stood over his seated brother. When you carry the USO name, when you claim membership in the bloodline, when you benefit from the legacy that our family built through blood and sacrifice, your personal choices become family responsibilities. The adoption of Roman's philosophical framework about individual actions affecting collective reputation revealed someone who had internalized the tribal chief's worldview and was now applying it to judge his own brother's worthiness. And your choices, Jey continued with devastating precision, have brought shame, danger, and near destruction to everyone who shares our bloodline. But Jimmy's response to his brother's systematic humiliation revealed someone who was finally beginning to understand that this wasn't just disappointment or brotherly concern, this was a power play designed to establish new hierarchy within their fractured family. Jey, what are you really saying here? Jimmy's voice carried a mixture of hurt and growing anger as he realized that his twin brother was treating him like an enemy rather than a victim of corporate manipulation. The question forced Jey to reveal his true intentions and the full scope of his transformation from loyal soldier to aspiring leader who viewed his own brother as a potential obstacle to his ambitions. What I'm saying, Jimmy, Jey's response came with the same calculated pause and emphasis that Roman had perfected, is that your judgment cannot be trusted, your loyalty has been compromised, and your continued association with the bloodline name represents a security risk that this family cannot afford. The systematic dismantling of Jimmy's position within their family structure revealed someone who had learned not just Roman's speaking style, but his strategic thinking about eliminating threats and consolidating power. You think I should be kicked out of the family? Jimmy's voice rose with incredulous anger as he began to understand the implications of his brother's assessment. But Jey's response revealed the full extent of his adoption of Roman's most ruthless leadership philosophy, treating family loyalty as something that needed to be earned rather than automatically granted. I think you need to acknowledge your failures. Jey's voice carried the authority of someone who believed he now had the right to judge his brother's worthiness, accept responsibility for the damage you've caused, and prove that you deserve to continue carrying the legacy that Roman nearly died protecting. The demand for acknowledgement, responsibility, and proof of worthiness revealed someone who had completely internalized Roman's approach to leadership through dominance and submission. This is insane. Jimmy stood up from his chair with obvious fury, finally pushing back against his brother's systematic humiliation. You're talking to me like I'm some random wrestler who needs to prove himself to you, instead of your twin brother who has stood by your side through everything we've faced. But Jey's response to Jimmy's emotional outburst revealed the cold calculation that had replaced brotherly affection in his transformed worldview. Standing by my side isn't enough anymore, Jimmy. Jey's voice remained calm and controlled in direct contrast to his brother's emotional volatility. Loyalty without competence is worthless. Brotherhood without judgment is dangerous. Family connection without contribution is just nepotism that weakens everyone. The philosophical framework that Jey was applying to judge his brother revealed someone who had moved beyond simple family relationships into the realm of strategic leadership that prioritized effectiveness over emotion. You're not Roman. Jimmy's response cut straight to the heart of what everyone was thinking as they watched this confrontation unfold. You don't get to judge me, evaluate my worthiness, or decide my place in this family. We're equals, we're twins, we're brothers. But Jey's reaction to being challenged on his assumed authority revealed the full scope of his transformation and his belief that he had inherited Roman's position within the family hierarchy. Roman is gone, Jimmy. Jey's voice carried finality that made everyone understand he wasn't just talking about Roman's current medical condition. Whether he recovers or not, whether he returns to wrestling or not, the bloodline needs leadership that can protect our legacy and secure our future. The implicit claim to Roman's leadership position sent shockwaves through everyone present, revealing that Jey's transformation wasn't just about judging Jimmy but about establishing his own dominance over the entire bloodline legacy. And that leadership, Jey continued with growing confidence, has to come from someone whose judgment can be trusted, whose loyalty is unquestionable, and whose personal relationships haven't compromised family security. The systematic exclusion of Jimmy from leadership consideration based on his marriage to a corporate spy revealed someone who was using his brother's failures as justification for his own power grab. You think you're the new tribal chief? Jimmy's voice carried disbelief and growing anger as he finally understood the full scope of his brother's ambitions. But Jey's response revealed that he had thought through the implications of his transformation and was prepared to claim the authority he believed Roman's absence had created. I think this family needs someone who puts the bloodline first. Jey's voice carried the same certainty that Roman had shown when making his most important decisions. Someone who learns from our mistakes instead of making excuses for them. Someone who protects our legacy instead of accidentally destroying it. The indirect but obvious claim to leadership authority revealed someone who believed he had evolved beyond his role as Roman's enforcer into someone worthy of carrying the family's highest position. Someone like you? Jimmy's challenge carried the weight of 30 years of brotherhood that was being sacrificed on the altar of power and ambition. Someone like me, Jey confirmed with absolute certainty, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had made a decision about his own destiny and wouldn't be deterred by emotional appeals or family sentiment. But the most shocking moment came when Jey delivered his final statement, using almost identical words to Roman's most famous declaration of dominance. Jey's voice took on the ceremonial tone that Roman had used during his most important pronouncements: "You will acknowledge me as the head of this family, or you will find yourself on the outside looking in." The ultimatum that Jey delivered to his own twin brother represented the complete transformation of their relationship from equal partnership to hierarchical dominance, with Jey assuming the role of judge and Jimmy being forced into the position of supplicant. "You will show me the respect that this position demands," Jey continued with language that could have come directly from Roman's playbook, "or you will learn what happens to people who disrespect the bloodline's leadership." But Jimmy's response to his brother's ultimatum revealed someone who was finally understanding that the twin brother he had known for 30 years had been replaced by someone who viewed family relationships as power structures to be controlled rather than bonds to be cherished. "You've lost your mind," Jimmy's voice carried heartbreak as much as anger. "This isn't leadership, it's megalomania. This isn't protecting the bloodline, it's destroying what made us strong in the first place." The accusation of megalomania struck at the heart of what everyone was witnessing: the corruption of power that had transformed a loyal brother into a calculating dictator who used family loyalty as a weapon for personal advancement. "What made us strong," Jey's response revealed his complete adoption of Roman's worldview, was clear hierarchy, unquestioned leadership, and the understanding that individual desires must be subordinated to collective needs. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Jey's transformation was his apparent belief that he was protecting the bloodline legacy rather than destroying it through his systematic elimination of dissent and demand for submission. Roman understood that leadership requires difficult decisions. Jey continued with the same philosophical framework that had justified Roman's most controversial actions. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice individual relationships to preserve institutional strength." The willingness to sacrifice his relationship with his twin brother for perceived institutional benefit revealed someone who had internalized Roman's most ruthless leadership principles without understanding the human cost of such decisions. "Roman never treated me like an enemy," Jimmy's response cut to the heart of the difference between Roman's leadership and Jey's emerging tyranny. "Even when he was demanding, controlling, or manipulative, I always knew he loved me and wanted what was best for our family." The comparison between Roman's manipulative but ultimately loving leadership and Jey's cold calculation revealed how power could corrupt even the most loyal person when they believed they were serving a greater good. "Love without respect is weakness," Jey's response showed how completely he had adopted Roman's most controversial philosophy. "Sentiment without submission is chaos. Brotherhood without hierarchy is just confusion that benefits our enemies." But the most devastating moment came when Jimmy finally understood that his twin brother had been completely lost to the same power corruption that had sometimes made Roman difficult to love but had never made him impossible to reach. "You're not my brother anymore." Jimmy's words carried the finality of someone who was mourning the loss of a relationship that had defined his entire life. "My brother would never talk to me like this, would never demand that I submit to his authority, would never choose power over family." The recognition that Jey had been fundamentally changed by his assumption of power represented more than just sibling conflict. It was the final destruction of the bloodline's foundation, which had always been built on mutual respect rather than hierarchical dominance. "Your brother," Jey's response revealed someone who viewed his transformation as evolution rather than corruption, was weak, naive, and too sentimental to protect this family from the enemies who nearly destroyed us. But as the confrontation reached its climax, with Jimmy walking away from his transformed brother and Jey standing alone in that interview area, the wrestling world realized they had witnessed something unprecedented: the birth of a new tribal chief who had learned all of Roman's techniques but none of his heart. "The bloodline is dead," one observer noted with obvious sadness. "Not because of corporate conspiracies or external enemies, but because power corrupted the one person who was supposed to preserve it." The tragic irony that Jey's attempt to save the bloodline had actually destroyed it revealed the fundamental flaw in leadership philosophy that prioritizes control over connection and submission over partnership. Jey became everything he thought Roman was, another witness observed, but he missed everything that made Roman actually effective: the underlying love that made people want to follow him even when they hated his methods. The wrestling world had witnessed the rise of a new would-be tribal chief, but they had also witnessed the death of brotherhood, the corruption of loyalty, and the final fracturing of wrestling's most dominant family. Jey Uso had shocked Jimmy with Roman-like words, but in doing so, he had revealed that learning someone's techniques without understanding their heart creates tyranny rather than leadership. The bloodline's legacy would never be the same, and neither would the relationship between two brothers who had been inseparable until one decided that power was more important than the bond that had defined their entire lives. Jey had become the tribal chief he thought his family needed, but he had lost the brother his heart required. The words he spoke sounded like Roman, but the spirit behind them was something far darker and more dangerous. The bloodline was reborn, but its soul had died in the process.